Hello Internet, Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, we talk about all things dorkly. So if it involves fantasy or sci-fi or superheroes or any such nonsense, we probably have a playlist about it. And today is no exception. I am talking about Lord of the Rings, specifically the Palantiri, or in the plural, Palantiri. The Seeing Stones. So, in the books, we're introduced to 3 of the Seeing Stones. There's the Palantiri at Orthanc in Isengard, the taking the hobbits to Isengard, which Saruman uses. There's the Palantiri in Gondor that Denethor uses, and there's the Palantiri that Sauron uses, which most likely was in Minas Morgul. However, there were many of them. Once upon a time, there were tons of Seeing Stones. In fact, the elves created them. It was Fëanor, the same guy who made the Silmarils, which are, the Silmarillion. He created the technology for what amounts to elven cell phones. So, the elven internet was these stones, the Seeing Stones. And so they created tons of them, and they gave them as a gift to the Númenóreans, so Aragorn's kin. The Númenóreans used them. Of course, when their island went belly up, kind of in their version of Atlantis, Númenor went into the sea. Elendil, all of Aragorn's ancestors, fled the island, and they brought 7 of the stones with them on their ships to Middle-earth. Interestingly, they're not all this size. They're not all like in the size of your hand. It's described, some of them were larger than one person could carry. So they're like boulder-shaped sized stones. So 7 stones arrived in Middle-earth. And the Númenóreans created towers to hold them. And so, hence the Orthanc and such, Isengard. So they had towers in the north, towers in the south, just all over Middle-earth. Notably, one of the towers was at Weathertop, Amansul, the Watchtower of Amansul, which we hear about in the books. Weathertop's where Gandalf has a battle, where hobbits and Aragorn have a big battle, but that used to be a spot where there was a big watchtower, and in that tower was one of these 7 very special stones. And, much like we see in the books, these stones were used to communicate across long distances. Cell phone. Hey, what's going on? You couldn't talk through them, though. You could, it was a visual medium. But you could communicate with the users on the other end of the line, so to speak. I think I'm pretty sure I read that it was directional. So, like, if you wanted to communicate with the tower to the east, you'd have to kind of get on the west side of the stone and like go, hey, you. But that was the way that basically you could defend the realm, was through the use of these 7 stones put in 7 towers. Obviously, one of the towers was Minas Ithil, easy for me to say, which when it was taken over, later became Minas Morgul, and that's why, hey, look, we took the land, we'll take that stone as well. So Sauron had access to one of these stones. And obviously, he used it to corrupt the viewers of the other 2 stones that were for Denethor, the legend has it that after because Denethor was driven to commit suicide. Obviously, he was so distraught at having looked through this, and Sauron gave him information that basically said, hey, by the way, this is hopeless, you're all going to die. Denethor was driven to madness and committed suicide. Well, supposedly, anyone looking into the Palantiri now at Gondor would only see visions of Denethor's madness. Like his psyche corrupted that particular Palantiri. And obviously Saruman was tricked more or less manipulated into helping Sauron through his version of the stone as well. So Sauron used it to good effect. Although obviously the big switcheroo is when he thinks he's seeing Frodo through the stone when he's in fact not. And so he himself is duped by looking through the stone. So it's like the seeing stones are only so effective, and in fact seem to, in some ways, deceive those who try to use it to their own ends. So, but what happened to the other 4 stones? There were 7 stones when the Númenóreans came over, but by the time of the War of the Ring, there's only 3 in use. And Tolkien wrote about the stones somewhat, but we don't know exactly what happened to all of the 4 other stones. We do know this. We know 2 of the stones were sunk into a frozen sea, basically, when the king of Arnor was shipwrecked. And his ship went down, and heck, he had 2 of those stones with him on that boat. I'm not exactly sure why they weren't kept in the tower at that point, but he took them with him. I think maybe the lands were under siege, and he decided to move them to safety. But they weren't. They were moved into the water, and they're now at the bottom of the ocean, of the sea. Another one, the largest of the stones, so this giant, massive Palantir, was housed at Osgiliath, which you might remember if you saw the movies. It's the city that's like between Mordor and Gondor. It was like that little boop, holding action. Well, that used to have this massive Palantir in it. And in a battle called the Kinstrife, supposedly that tower was destroyed and the giant stone rolled into the Anduin. So it's at the bottom of the river, which you would think, if it's a giant stone at the bottom of the river, someone might be able to pull that up. But supposedly no one had ever found that stone again. And then that leaves one other stone, which I think the jury's out on what happened to the last of the 7 stones. There's also actually an 8th stone, which they called a master stone. It's one of the elves' master stones, which apparently could look at all stones, or you could pivot it in any direction you wanted. I think it was too far away from Middle-earth to actually communicate with the 7 stones, but it actually was on an island, kind of like the Isle of Avalon from Arthurian days, Avalone. It was just off the coast of the Undying Lands. So when people were taking ships to the west, when Frodo goes west at the end of The Lord of the Rings, he's probably going to see that tower on his way to the Undying Lands. And that tower holds a master seeing stone, which I think would be impressive to behold. But yeah, anyway, that is your little background on the Palantir. I just thought it was always really cool that they had their own mythology behind them, that it wasn't just, oh, look, it's my cell phone. Boop, hey. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please hit subscribe, hit like. I'll be doing more Lord of the Rings videos, especially as we get closer to Amazon releasing its Lord of the Rings series, whenever that happens. Probably something like 2020, who knows. But in any case, plenty of topics to talk about. And we will be back actually later this week with the season finale of Luke Cage. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye now.